Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to show you guys how to make one of my favorite Italian soups, ribollita. So these are the ingredients we're looking at, and it is about a cup of onions, about a cup of celery, about a little more than a cup of carrots, and these are the tops from the celery, a 15-ounce can of cannellini beans, a tablespoon of fresh rosemary, 3 bay leaves, some garlic cloves, some sun-dried tomatoes, and Savoy cabbage. I'm going to put this together and we're going to go over the steps. So the reason I wanted to talk about this particular soup today was this is a soup that relies on what is known as the mirepoix. In French cooking, the mirepoix is kind of the base for lots of soups, stews, sauces, and basically mirepoix is even parts celery, onions, and carrots sauteed with some salt. I do mine a little bit different. I always do more carrots in mine, and I like to add garlic to mine. I also like to kind of make, shall we say, alternative mirepoix. Like I love to use things like instead of using the onion, I would use a leek. Instead of the celery, I might use fennel. Instead of the carrots, I might use parsnip, and this creates a different kind of a mirepoix. But like I said, that's not traditional. So over here in this pot, I just have about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and that's getting a little bit warm. Over here I have the bread. If any of you are familiar with ribollita, you've probably heard it called Italian bread soup. I've also heard it called Tuscan bread soup. I've heard it called Tuscan bean soup. Like every name under the book. Basically, ribollita is one of those great recipes that you can't really make it wrong. So the ingredients that I'm using are specifically the type of ingredients I like to use, but if you go online, you'll see there's like, everybody's got a recipe for ribollita. Ribollita in Italian just means reboiled, and it is a traditional soup from the north of Italy. It almost always has white beans in it. The one I'm making today, I'm using sun-dried tomatoes because I don't like the heavy tomato ribollita that I see some cooks. But like if you go online, you'll see a lot of cooks do a heavier tomato-based. They use different vegetables. I just do, mine's always got Savoy cabbage in it, and I always use rosemary because those are my 2 favorite things to put into ribollita. So I have the bread over here. It's getting stale. So we're just going to start our mirepoix with just onions with a little bit of sea salt. And when you're making this soup, you are going to add 1 ingredient at a time. This is how a mirepoix works. You use 1 ingredient at a time, a little bit of salt, the olive oil's going. We're going to let that onion just kind of do its thing. The next thing we're going to add is going to be the celery. And same thing, we're going to add the celery. We're going to add our sea salt. Going to give it a good stir, mix it in with the onion. And because I'm working with an electric stove, which I don't like, I already have to turn it down because it's sizzling a little bit too much. Now we're going to add the carrots. Again, we're adding the carrots. We're adding our little bit of salt here. We're going to give it a good stir. To this, I'm also going to add our little bit of celery stalk that we have left here. We're going to put that in there. Celery stalk, in this case, is almost like adding parsley. It adds that kind of parsley flavor to it. Plus, you know, the thing about ribollita is this is a soup that is about not wasting things. It was a soup made to use up stale bread. It couldn't be used for other things. That's where it got its nickname, you know, bread soup. And now I'm going to add the rosemary. A little more salt. I'm going to add the rosemary. Put that in there. Sorry, lost you guys for a minute there. I'm adding the rosemary now. I'm using fresh herbs, but whether you're using fresh or dry, it's always a good idea to add your herbs when you're doing the oil for your soup. or I'm sorry, for the oil for anything you're making actually, because the oil is going to help to open up the cortex of the dried herbs and kind of rehydrate them and help them to release their flavor. In this case, it's with the fresh herbs, it's going to do the same thing. When you're using dry herbs, they're much more concentrated, so you can use less. I'm using fresh herbs, and so I didn't use as much, because also this is a kind of recipe like I really want you to taste specifically the Savoy cabbage, which is going to be incredibly sweet when it's cooked, especially because it's going to be cooked with sun-dried tomatoes. And I want this to be a soup that tastes very savory without tasting like a tomato sauce, which is why I don't use a lot of crushed tomatoes in mine. All right, and I'm going to put some crushed garlic in it. Like I said, that's not really traditional in all ribollettas or in mirepoix, but I love it. So all you do with your garlic is you put your knife edge on it, and you just push down with your knife edge. And what it does is, you can see, crushes your garlic up, and actually, I'll give that one another little crush. There we go. That's what I wanted. See how nice and crushed that is? So that's nice and open. We're going to put this right into the soup. We're going to give it another good stir. Now, I will be using stock later in this recipe, but for now, I am going to force these vegetables to create their own stock. I'm going to add just water to them, and I'm going to let this sit. I'm going to give it 15 minutes, maybe 20. I might even give it a whole half hour. When you do this, you're doing what's called sweating the vegetables. I'm going to cover this with a lid because I don't want any of the water in here to escape. I want the water to hit the top of the lid and go back in. I don't want any of it to evaporate. When I'm doing this, what will happen is I will have this, lovely soup, and this 2 cups of water that I put in on top of these vegetables, they're going to open up the vegetables. They're going to kind of steam them. They're going to make the vegetables release their flavors along with the sea salt. And they're really going to create their own little stock. To then to that later, I will add more stock. Okay, so let's just let that do its thing for a little bit. All right, guys. Sorry, still sick. So while this is cooking, I chopped up all that Savoy cabbage. This ended up being, I'm going to say this is close to 3 cups. This was the smallest Savoy cabbage I could find. The reason I use Savoy is it's a much sweeter cabbage than some of the other ones. All right, so we're going to go back to our soup now. And as you can see, it's actually boiling. And I don't know if you can see it. I don't think we're going to be able to see it. But the water is actually a different color now. And to this, we are going to add the rest of our ingredients. So we're going to add the 15-ounce can of beans. Whoops, sorry. I know, it's hard to do it. It's hard to cook with one hand. All right, I know that's hard to see. Because we're using beans, I'm going to add 3 fresh bay leaves. They're going to cut down on some of that gassiness in the beans. We're going to add the sun-dried tomatoes. Like I said, these sun-dried tomatoes are going to give it a tomatoey flavor without making it like a heavy tomato, saucy kind of soup. It's going to be more of a bean-style soup, not so much a tomatoey soup. I'm adding to that just 2 cups of vegetable stock. You can also use chicken stock if you want to. It's absolutely fine to use chicken stock. Many recipes use chicken stock. And unfortunately, guys, I think I'm going to have to put you on pause for 1 minute.